Welcome to Building Trust that Facilitates Revival. My name is Rick Lovall. I'm the Assistant Director of the Stewardship Group, Vice President of the Loan Fund, and also own a company called Lead Strategies, which I will talk about in just a moment. I came to work at headquarters 2 years ago after pastoring for 9 years. In that 9-year term, I learned so much about how important trust is when it comes to having revival in your church. Obviously, the essentials of prayer and fasting and Bible studies, those are non-negotiables. You have to have that in place. But I want to show you today how important it is to also intentionally work to build trust, not just with the pastor and those in the pew, but even across the pew, those that are leading departments in all aspects of the church. It is essential that you build trust in order to have true unity. Before I came to pastor, I was a banker for 15 years in the other state that I lived in. I thought that was going to be my career forever. And so I graduated with a degree in banking, went to work at a bank, thought that was it. God decided to change that in 2010, and I became a pastor of a small church. Our very first service, we had 37 people. As I began to meet with the people and learn their stories, I learned that there was a lot of broken trust in their life. In all manners, broken trust with family members, broken trust with church members, broken trust with former pastors, broken trust in their work. It was everywhere. We started doing outreach for backsliders. As the backsliders would come in, we would get to know them. I would hear the exact same stories of broken trust. I began to be quite overwhelmed by that. And my wife and I decided we were going to fast and pray and seek God about what to do and what we should do specifically in dealing with all of this broken trust. During that prayer, the Lord gave me 6 very specific things that we were to do, and one of those I want to talk about. The third thing that I felt impressed by the Holy Ghost to do was restore faith in the ministry. The Lord began to show me how that all these people, they did have faith in God. We might have viewed them as backsliders simply because they weren't attending church anymore, but they had faith in God. Their faith and their trust in people had been broken, and that the revival that God had intended for our city was going to be determined by how well trust was restored. In the church world, we call it faith. In the business world, we call it trust. These two things work hand in hand. I wanted to make sure that the people could exercise their faith. That's the essentiality of discipleship. People must be able to exercise their faith in God. But to do that in a safe environment in the church, there had to be trust both with their fellow brothers and sisters in the pew and also with the pastor in the pulpit. There has to be both trust and faith working together in the church. I went on a journey to study how important trust was in this atmosphere. Things like the shepherd and sheep connection, how much sheep have to be able to trust the shepherd in order to follow them. You know, those analogies, even though they're real life, work extremely well in the church. I also wanted to look at some business aspects, wanted to learn more about leadership. I had been, in my banking world, been very involved in leadership development. So at this point in the church, I needed to become bivocational, and so I started this company called Lead Strategies. I provided leadership training for manufacturing firms, colleges, civic organizations, places like that. And the material that I developed along that way became very key parts of actually the development of the church. One of the books that I got was called Establishing an Environment of Trust. I built a session out of that I used both in the manufacturing industry and also in our church, and that's the context of what I'm going to teach today. When you establish an environment of trust, you have to be intentional. Trust does not happen just because you want it to happen. You have to intentionally develop relationships, both whether you're establishing trust, you're enhancing existing trust, or you're working to restore broken trust. I want to walk you through some very specific things that we did to help facilitate the revival that I believe can help every church. First of all, I want to decide, what is trust? There's a lot of ways to talk about trust, trusting people. I'm going to give you 4 aspects of that. You'll see on this slide that the definition of trust can be summed into 2 words: confident reliance. How confident are you that you can rely on someone to do what they said they were going to do the job that they're supposed to do? How confident are you? In that confidence, we have emotion. We must understand that trust is directly connected to our emotions. If you study the human body, you'll learn about the amygdala, which is a little part of your brain, which is the core operating system, if you will, of our personal security system. It's also what directs our emotions. And we can train that part of our brain. For instance, if you are deathly scared of mice, you can train your brain to cause you to react anytime you hear a mouse. There's people who could wake up in the middle of the night because they heard a mouse scamper across the rafter. Other people would sleep right through it and never hear that. Okay, some people are deathly afraid of spiders. If they see that spider, there is a great emotional reaction to that because they do not trust that spider. They do not want to be hurt by that spider. And it's directly connected to their emotions. The same thing comes into play when you're talking about trusting relationships in the church. You can see here the 4 areas that are very instrumental in developing trust. They have to do with demonstrating consistency. If you want to build trust, you have to demonstrate consistency in how you function, how you communicate with people, and I'll get into more details of that. The second thing, trust involves care. How well you show people that you care for them. Genuine care for their well-being helps to improve and establish trust. The third thing, respect and valuing other people. Respecting their differences. Valuing people even though they may not see things the exact way you see things. They may operate different than you operate. But understanding that they bring skills and abilities to the table that you can work with, and learning to value and respect that. Even valuing and respecting their opinions matter when it comes to building trust. The fourth thing, it is very important that who you are and what you do both matter to whoever it is that you're working with. Okay, so if you're talking about a supervisor and an employee relationship, that supervisor must value who that person is, not just what that person can do for them. And when that gets out of line, can be some great broken trust. And again, I'll go more into detail on that. Great leaders should intentionally work to remove the fear factor. If we're talking about broken trust and we're talking about emotions, we have to realize there are certain fear factors involved with getting close to people. Okay? If you're getting close to people in a pastoral saint relationship, how close someone can get to you is going to be determined by their fear of you. You want to make sure that you're working to remove the fear barriers. And as we do this, you're going to see people grow and people develop and people being willing to do things for the kingdom they've never been willing to do before. Trust is very tangible. Tangible meaning that it's something you can touch. Now, we can't see it in the room, but there's a little analogy that I like to use. I'm holding up a marker, but I want us to pretend that this marker is a trustometer. So if you have a thermometer, you understand that that's measuring the temperature in the room. A trustometer is going to measure the trust in the room. So we're going to assume that a trustometer should reach 100. So if you're in a situation where you walk in and you assume that everybody trusts everybody, then this trustometer should read 100. What would it read if I walked into your church? If I'm in the area of the pews, how well will it gauge the trust between the people in the pews? Now I move up and I'm standing between the pulpit and the pew. How well does it read the trust coming from the pew to trust the people in the pulpit? And then flip that around, how well does the pulpit trust the pew? Those 3 areas, again, pew to pew trust, pew to the pulpit, and pulpit to the pew. It is essential that we work diligently to build trust so that there is a high level of trust so people can build unity, people can build relationships, people can move forward and heal from the broken trust that they've had in the past. When we look at trust, we realize there's 2 sides of this coin. On this next slide, you see that there are very key aspects to any leader, whether it's the pastor, it's the youth leader, it's the Sunday school director, I don't care what it is. There are 2 sides of this coin that we must be diligent about. The first one, working to inspire trust. As a leader, you should want people to trust you. And in doing so, there's 2 things. Number 1, do things that cause people to trust you. I'm going to give you a list of 4 things that you can do to help inspire people to trust you. But I'm also going to show you 6 things that you should stop doing because those things actually break trust. You want to make sure that you're not trying to build trust while at the same time breaking trust. You'll get nowhere with that. And in a moment, I'm going to show you what those things are. The second side of the trust coin is in how well you demonstrate your trust with them. Again, we want to inspire their trust in us as leaders, but at the same time, we must show them we trust them. And in doing so, we need to develop that trust. Again, there's 4 things I'm going to show you that will develop the trust that you're trying to develop in them, while at the same time, you must communicate that trust. If you trust someone, tell them you trust them. Humans need affirmation. People need to know how you feel about them. And if you have, maybe there's something that they've done, maybe they organized a fundraiser and they did a great job with it. Maybe they may not be the person that wants you to go to the pulpit and call their name out in front of everybody, but go to them individually. Tell them how much you appreciate what they did. That is your way of demonstrating trust with that person. You're building trust. We call it fostering trust. When you're doing that, you're establishing your trust for the next thing that they're going to do. If you never say anything to them, you never give them any affirmation, they're always going to wonder, did I do a good job? I don't know if I did a good job. Well, if you work to establish that and communicate that clearly, they're going to know they did a good job. And whatever gets rewarded gets repeated. If you reward that behavior with affirmation, with words of affirmation or a handwritten note or something like that, you're going a long ways to building the trust you need to build to get that person to take maybe more initiative in the future. When we look at this, again, there are 6 things that break trust. I like to use the analogy of an electrical system. If I'm going to change out an outlet in the wall, there's one thing I must do if I want to be safe in doing that. I'm going to go to the breaker box and I'm going to turn off the breaker that is firing that particular outlet. If I don't turn that breaker off, I stand a really good chance of getting shocked when I touch that outlet. So I want to make sure I turn that breaker off so that I don't get hurt. Building on that analogy, it's very important that we understand there are 6 breakers that we need to turn off so that we don't hurt other people with it and that we don't hurt the trust that we're trying to build. The first one, as you can see here, is very simple. The breaks promises breaker. If you're a promise breaker, people will not trust you. Do what you say you're going to do. It's that simple. This even goes back all the way to people's childhoods. Think about, let's use an example of a family where maybe there's a dad that's not with the family, and he promises the child, hey, I'll be at your birthday party, but then he doesn't show up at the birthday party. Hey, I'm going to get you that rod and reel, but he never buys the rod and reel. It's the mom that promises something all the time, but she never fulfills the promise. Think about the trust that's broken in that very intimate relationship. The same thing happens in the church. It happens in the workforce. It happens everywhere. If you are breaking promises, you are not building trust. You are causing distrust in your relationships. It's very important that you make sure that you keep the promises that you make. Second thing, serves own interest. If you have people that work for you and all you do is use them to make you look good, they're nothing there but just something to serve you, you're going to have broken trust in that relationship. Make sure that people understand, again, it goes back to people need to know that you care for who they are, not just what they do. It's important that they understand that you care for their person, not just the product that they put out. Third thing, acting inconsistently. It is essential that leaders are consistent and that people can trust how you're going to lead them. Think about it from a military perspective. If you're going into the battlefield, you want to make sure that your commander is someone that is consistent, that they're not going to fly off the handle, they're not going to do things that are emotionally driven, but they're going to be consistent so you can trust wherever they lead you into that battle. All humans operate that way. Humans want to follow leaders that are consistent in their actions. The next thing, avoiding issues. Leaders who avoid issues, they tell all the other people that's affected by those issues that I don't care how it affects you. For instance, if you have someone who you've asked to do something, they don't do it right, and maybe you are you don't like conflict, okay? And so you're hesitant to deal with that issue and you avoid it, but yet their failure to do that is affecting all these other people. It's all these other people that are going to start distrusting you. So make sure that you address the issues that need to be addressed in a very professional, assertive way. There's issues that have to be dealt with, or they simply breed more issues. The fifth thing, leaders who make assumptions or they base their decision on assumptions actually cause distrust. You will break trust with people if all of your decisions are based on your perceptions. Okay? When you make an assumption or you make what's called an assumed decision, what you're really doing there is you're telling people that my perspective of this is what I'm going to base all my decisions on. Nobody else's perspective matters. Okay? You're not making a fact-based decision. When you're making decisions in the church, it's very important that you get other people's viewpoints. There were times in the church there where I would form small committees and I would get their viewpoint on matters that I knew that I didn't have all the information on. If we're going to do a community event, I wanted to make sure that I pulled in people onto a committee that was involved in those areas of the community before I made a rash decision on something. When we would do outreach efforts, I wanted the people that were going to be involved in this, I wanted their perceptions on the whole thing. I wanted the facts that they knew on the table so that the decisions I made were well informed. The next thing, and this is the big one right here, doubting others. It's amazing how often we demonstrate doubt in other people. Now, as I close out this session in just a little bit, I'm going to show you an analogy where that is demonstrated. But for right now, I just suffice it to say this. If you have constant doubt in other people, what it is you're really afraid of their failures. You're afraid of how their failures are going to affect you. If that's how you operate, I want to encourage you, work on training people. Training people on how they should operate so that you don't live in constant doubt, okay? Chronic doubt is very destructive in any environment, especially a church. So again, these 6 trust breakers: breaks promises, serves own interest, acts inconsistently, avoids issues, makes assumptions, and doubts others. Those are things that we need to stop doing so that we can actually build the trust that we need to build. So let's move now into the 4 trust builders. These are 4 things that if you'll work on these, and there's so many ways to do them, I like to summarize them into these 4 elements, okay? So the first one, fostering open communication. How open are you to people talking? Whether it's meeting with them individually, it's hearing ideas, it's anything that you can do where people know they are safe with what they say. The first thing, truth must be safe. There should be an open door for truth anywhere. We quote the scripture all the time. It's truth that sets men free. We know that truth is essential wherever you're at, okay? I wanted to make sure that I had an open door for truth to be shared. I want to give you one quick testimony. We had a lady that over those times as I would teach about trust and we worked on developing trust, she came to us one day. This lady was in her 60s. She had been in church all of her life. She met with my wife and I, and she confessed to, at 28 years old, she had had an abortion. She was unmarried. She had an abortion. Only her and her mother knew about it, and her mother was deceased. Now, this lady is now 60-something years old. And in that meeting, she said something that profoundly impacted me. She was sitting there in the chair, and after she had said what she had said, she looked up, and with tears in her eyes, she said, "I finally feel that I can talk about it and not be ostracized." The fact that this lady could confess something that had been eating at her all of these years, she knew it was wrong. She felt horrible for doing it, but she could never talk to anybody about it. She finally had that safe environment. I watched this lady go from being She would come to church and was always down. She never really felt free to worship. All of that living with such condemnation on her life. She went from that to being one of the most joy-filled persons in the church. You can see it on her Facebook post. It went from being negative to being positive, quoting scriptures and encouraging. We watched her life change simply because she finally felt safe sharing something that was burdening to her. The next thing, being reliable and consistent. We go back to what we talked about before. Think about how you operate, how you communicate, how you get stuff done. How reliable and consistent are you in that? The more reliable and consistent you are, the more people are going to trust you. The third thing, treats everyone with respect and fairness. Again, we're back to this. Treating people fairly. Now, I'll admit, treating people equal is not the same as treating someone fairly. Use an example on this. If you have a board member that's been in church for 35 years, you have certain expectations for that person. It is not fair to expect a new convert that's been in church for 6 months to have the same exact lifestyle manners. It's not fair to this new convert. If you treat them equal, that's not fair. But people will trust you more if they know you're treating everyone fairly based on where they're at in their life and their walk with God. The fourth thing, shows confidence in others. How well you communicate your confidence in other people. I talked about that earlier. It is absolutely essential. The more you communicate your confidence in other people, the more they're going to give you reasons to be confident in them. It's going to build on itself. I want to ask this question. Can the people you lead trust you with their pain? They'll never heal from that pain if they can't trust you with it. The revival that I believe God wants for all of our churches involves what Jesus promised in Luke 4:18. He's come to heal brokenhearted. Move down a little further, and he said he's come to set at liberty them that are bruised. People that have been hurt by other people. He wants to set them free. The church should be a place where people can be healed and delivered from that. And it starts with how the leadership builds and fosters trust in that environment. Let's move now to an analogy that I want to close with. This is the bicycle analogy. And I want to draw a little chart to demonstrate this. This graph is going to show the level of oversight that you should have over a person based on how much experience they have. To put this in terms of a bicycle, if you have a child that you're wanting to teach them how to ride the bicycle, you typically take them out to the sidewalk or the driveway. You're holding the bike up, and as a parent, you're going to have your hand on the seat, and you're going to have a hand on the handlebars. The child is sitting there. You're giving them the reassurance, you can do this. You're encouraging. Again, you're communicating your trust in that child. You're building them up. You're not sitting there throwing doubt at them. You're not holding the bike going, you're fixing to crash. I hope you're ready for this. Okay? You're holding that bike and encourage them. You're going to be able to do this. Just start pedaling. I'll be right here. They start with zero experience. But as they go down the sidewalk, their level of experience moves up. Now, they might be wobbling and shaking, but you've still got a hold on them. At the same time this is happening, your level of oversight is starting to come down. Somewhere in this, you make a very important decision. You decide to let go of the handlebars. You haven't let go of the seat yet. You're still providing the balance and the push. But you start letting them steer. You're starting to show them confidence. Hey, you've got this, you're steering. And you might even tell them that, hey, you're steering, you're doing really good. And then at some point you come to the next big decision. And this big decision is where you actually let go. Now, you're still running beside them, but during this moment, your level of oversight, if you will, your management of them starts to come down. But here's the deal. As a parent that's concerned about the child, you never turn your back and walk away when this child is just starting to ride. There's going to be a level of oversight that you maintain, okay? In the business world, a supervisor should always supervise. But there has to be a point in time where you're allowing that worker to ride the bike on their own, so to speak. In this, right here, there's a really interesting thing that happens with the child on the bicycle. When they realize you've let go, they have moved from fear of you not letting go, the fear of letting go to the fear of not letting go. At some point, they want you to let go. And when they realize that you've let go of both the handlebars and the seat, they take off. And they're riding. You're standing back here, you're still cheering. Now, to use this in church context, this works even if it's somebody who, maybe you've asked somebody to organize a Valentine's banquet, and they've never done that before. But you've given them instructions, and you've given them oversight, and you've allowed them to make decisions on their own. And finally, as the pastor, you step back and say, hey, that's yours now. And then you just start cheering them. And then once you see that they have done a great job with it, then you start cheering and communicating with them. Hey, man, that was a great job you did organizing that Valentine's banquet. I appreciate what you did. You're building their confidence, and you're actually building trust both with you to them and them to you. But let's go back to the handlebars. If up here, you know it's time to let go of the handlebars, but you're so afraid of the crash that might happen that you refuse to let go of the handlebars. And instead, this line gets right here. At some point, the child is going to think, you should let go of the handlebars. At some point, the child is going to recognize you're not letting them ride the bike. You're just letting them sit on it while you do everything. This right here in the business world is what we call micromanagement. Micromanagement destroys trust in the workplace, and it also destroys trust in the church. If this child realizes you've not let go of the bicycle, they're going to want to go back to the house. In the workplace, if someone realizes that you're always looking over their shoulder, in the church, if the pastor always has to have his hands on everything and never lets the church do what the church has skills and abilities to do, people are going to move away. People are going to go find another church to go to. People are going to sit in the pew. And here's what happened. Right here, fight or flight kicks in. Remember I told you that trust is driven by that amygdala in the back of our brain? That's where fight or flight originates from. And fight or flight will kick in. You'll have people start fighting leadership, or you'll have people running away from leadership. Something's going to happen right there. The more you want to keep your hands on everything, and the more you want to control everything, the less people are going to grow. We want revival. Revival means people are developing in their discipleship. They're becoming who God has created them to be. And through training, through encouragement, through helping them learn, they can do this. Because the fact is right here, this area right here, where you have backed away, you're still watching what's happening. You still have oversight, but you're watching this kid go down the sidewalk. This area right here is what I call the trust gap. This gap represents distance. Now, I started out talking about how close people get to you, but at some point there has to be trust that allows distance to happen. You stand back and cheer them on. This gap right here is the greatest thing that can happen. This is where revival happens. This right here is where you don't have to worry about all this, and we have incredible success and church growth. I was very intentional about how we implemented this. And I've helped some other churches implement this to the point where you're starting to see people grow. And when you see people grow and the people talk about how trusting the church is, they invite other people in. I watched this church in 9 years go from 37 people to consistently run 180 to 200. Our record attendance was over 250. All of that happened because of the trust that was built. We implemented it into everything we were doing. I wanted to see people trusting one another. I wanted to see people trusting me, and I wanted to be able to trust other people. The same thing happens in the workplace, it happens in the home, and it happens in the church. When this all comes into being, and people have trust one to another, and unity prevails, you will see revival happen in your church. In all of this, I want to encourage you. Be very intentional. Be very honest. Asking yourself the hard questions. Do I demonstrate my trust for people? Do they know I trust them? How am I working to develop that trust? Do they know maybe where trust needs to be developed? Are you taking time to be intentional about it? I believe we are called to have revival in this end time hour. And to do that, we have to understand that building and fostering trust in the church is essential to how faith is developed and grown with the people in the church. If you'd like to learn more about this, you can reach me at headquarters. Again, I'm Assistant Director of Stewardship. I'd be glad to talk to you about it. And anything we can do, we want to pray and help you have the revival that God intends for you to have in the church that you lead. Thank you very much.